I'm telling you, that's what he said. And send. From casual chats to compelling presentations, the power of words can't be overstated. A single comment can make or break personal and professional connections alike. So, how can you make sure your words are aligned with your values and goals? Well, the best way to do so would be to make an effort to understand how verbal communication works and which skills can help you improve your conversations. With that in mind, let's start at the very beginning by answering the deceptively simple question at the center of this topic. So, what is verbal communication anyway? Well, it's what I'm doing right now. I guess you could say it's one of those you'll know it when you hear it types of things. But that's not good enough as far as definitions go, is it? To make sure we're all on the same page, let's try to come up with a definition most of us can agree on, even if that's easier said than done. After all, depending on the way you define the word verbal, you could come up with two different definitions of this type of communication. The more generous reading of the word would include any exchange that relies on words to convey meaning. That would mean that both spoken and written communication could be seen as subcategories of the larger concept that is verbal communication. On the other hand, if we take verbal to mean spoken, then verbal communication would refer to communication relying on spoken words only. In this case, verbal communication would be one of 4 types of communication, along with written, visual, and non-verbal communication. Of course, non-verbal communication actually has a lot of influence on our verbal exchanges. Unlike verbal communication, non-verbal communication typically relies on the individual's physicality to transmit messages. So, rather than words, non-verbal behaviors are expressed through a person's appearance, posture, gestures, facial expressions, eye movements, as well as their use of physical space, and vocal qualities such as volume, pitch, and tone of voice. These additional forms of expression can either reinforce or contradict the verbal messages that are being communicated. For example, letting your anxiety show during a job interview can make you seem pretty suspicious when you start bragging about your career accomplishments. The hiring managers you talk to might wonder whether you're simply nervous or lying to make yourself look better. No matter what the truth is, knowing how to get your nonverbal behaviors to align with your verbal message would eliminate this concern. Of course, that's only one example of verbal communication in a professional setting. With that in mind, let's talk about other ways verbal communication might occur in the workplace and why it's so important for professional success. If we're going to narrow down the definition of verbal communication, we should note that this type of communication requires us to be able to hear and be heard by the people we're talking to. In the past, that would have limited our practice of verbal communication to in-person encounters. But thanks to the growing number of technological advancements we've seen over the past century, we now have many more ways to talk to each other. In addition to face-to-face conversations, we can also communicate with our coworkers through phone calls or by using employee communication apps like Pumble. Pumble lets users communicate verbally through audio and video messages, as well as one-on-one and group audio and video calls. So companies use this software to have regular team meetings, as well as more one-sided presentations and conferences. But why does verbal communication matter so much in a professional environment? Shouldn't we be able to communicate everything in writing and leave it at that? Well, doing that wouldn't allow you to reap the benefits of verbal communication. According to some statistics, effective verbal communication in the workplace leads to an increased job satisfaction, fewer interpersonal conflicts, stronger relationships, as well as higher productivity on teams. Simply put, practicing open communication in the workplace leads to people feeling like their opinions and expertise are being respected, which leads them to have better relationships with the people they work with. On top of that, not hesitating to speak to your coworkers when issues come up significantly reduce unnecessary delays that might negatively affect productivity in the workplace. Even so, not all types of verbal communication can bring all these benefits to the table. Now that we know what verbal communication is, let's talk about the different forms it can take, depending on the different types and styles of communication we use. Though these two concepts might appear similar, they're actually different things. On the one hand, different styles of communication show how we share verbal messages, while types of communication tell us more about where and with whom we are communicating. According to this model, there are 5 types of communication based on the number of participants involved. On the one hand, we have more intimate types of communication: intrapersonal, interpersonal, and small group communication. Intrapersonal verbal communication is pretty rare, unless you're one of those people who like to talk to themselves out loud. After all, this type consists of the messages we tell ourselves, and most people don't really vocalize these private thoughts. On the other hand, interpersonal require at least 2 people, or 3 or more in the case of small group communication. Since these types of communication allow us to exchange thoughts and ideas with our coworkers, they're great for building stronger relationships and promoting teamwork. These benefits are notably absent from the final 2 types of communication: public and mass communication, which focus on spreading verbal messages rather than sparking a conversation. Public communication requires 1 or more speakers, an audience to receive their message, and a medium through which that message can be communicated. Examples of public verbal communication include company-wide announcements, press conferences, and keynote speaking engagements. On the other hand, mass communication aims to get its message across to as many people as possible. I guess you could say that this video is a perfect example of that. After all, mass communication takes advantage of TV, newspapers, radio shows, and more recently, social media platforms like YouTube. Since the goal of this type of communication is to reach the maximum number of people, messages delivered in this way tend to be the most difficult to retract. So, it's important to think them through before communicating them with the world. Having discussed the various types of communication, let's spare a second to talk about the styles of communication, which describe the way we communicate with others. According to the most popular classification, these styles include aggressive, passive, passive-aggressive, and assertive communication. Try to guess which one of those is the best one to use with your coworkers. I'll wait. Okay, let me give you some hints. Being too aggressive in the workplace tends to erode trust, so that can't be it. On the other hand, passive communication won't get you where you want to be either. In fact, some people find that kind of lifeless delivery incredibly annoying. And the same goes for passive-aggressive communication. It's great if you're looking to increase tension on your team. So, the only style that's generally acceptable and considered effective in the workplace is assertive communication. Using this style of communication allows us to be direct and honest about our wants and needs without trampling on other people's feelings and ideas. Because of that, it's great for fostering open communication in the workplace. However, not everyone has the skills necessary to properly employ this style of verbal communication. And which skills are those? I'm glad you asked. If you want to become better at holding conversations in the workplace, honing your verbal communication skills is sure to help. For one, focusing on describing your ideas in simple terms and without unnecessary jargon is a great way to practice clarity in communication. On the other hand, if you find yourself in the role of the audience, you can still bring some clarity into the conversation by learning how to ask the right questions to achieve mutual understanding. Similarly, developing tact will allow you to strike the right tone in every situation. After all, the words you use to communicate will depend on the purpose of the conversation as well as the relationship with the person you're talking to. So, in addition to achieving clarity in communication, choosing our words carefully can also help us avoid misunderstandings and achieve our goals. Still, if you happen to slip up and say the wrong thing during an important conversation, you'll be happy to know that there is a skill that will help you get over that hump: adaptability. Being self-aware enough to own and correct those kinds of mistakes is a great way to be relatable and get closer to the people around you. You can also pair this skill with the skill of emotional regulation if you want to keep your cool when you're misunderstood or met with some bad news. Being able to regulate your emotions in a professional setting will also help you control both verbal and nonverbal expressions, which may contradict your desired message. That's what makes having a solid understanding of nonverbal communication another crucial skill for making your verbal exchanges a success. On the one hand, that understanding will help you avoid contradicting your verbal messages with your nonverbal behaviors. However, knowing how to analyze the nonverbal cues others are using will also help you become a better listener. Which brings us to the last skill on our list. Most types of verbal communication requires participants to switch between the role of the message sender and receiver. So, if you want to be good at verbal communication, you'll also have to learn how to really listen to what others are saying, and even the things they're leaving out. To reach that goal, get into the habit of paying close attention not only to what others are saying, but also how they're saying it and what their underlying message might be. Honing all of these skills is a sure way to increase your chances of enjoying all those benefits of effective verbal communication we discussed earlier. Nowadays, most people use business messaging software to communicate with their coworkers, even if they're in the same office building. But if you want to experience the full benefits of verbal communication, choose an app that makes it easy to get your message across, like Pumble. Pumble's user-friendly interface makes sending and receiving audio and video messages from coworkers effortless. On top of that, the app's video conferencing feature is equally great, whether you're having one-on-one meetings or team brainstorming sessions. So, don't fall victim to messaging apps that expect you to solely rely on written communication. Let your voice be heard. Get Pumble today. If you liked what we talked about in this video, be sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss our next video. In the meantime, check out the Pumble blog if you're interested in learning more about professional communication. See you soon.